This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. The News Hour with Ian Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. 3 minutes past 7 is the time on LBC. It's Ian Dale with you until 10 o'clock. The News Hour headlines. The Health Secretary comes to blows with GPs. Not literally, thank goodness. North Yorkshire's Police and Crime Commissioner resigns following comments he made around Sarah Everard's murder. Shortages continue to cause problems as the government changes visa rules for foreign butchers to prevent a cull of pigs. And Prince William questions whether sending billionaires into space is really a number one priority.
The News Hour with Ian Dale. This is LBC.
Another Health Secretary, another war between the government and GPs. New figures from NHS England today show that A&E waiting times are the worst on record. The proportion of patients seen within the target time of 4 hours has fallen to only 75%. The government's solution? Well, if GPs saw more people, some of the pressure on A&E would be eased. But that response from the Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, has caused upset. He's set up an emergency winter rescue plan so that GP surgeries can take on more temporary staff. But he's also pushing for more face-to-face GP appointments this winter. Before the pandemic, more than 80% of GP appointments were face-to-face. In August this year, it was just 58%. If that doesn't change, Sajid Javid is threatening to name and shame GPs as well as a chance of missing out on this new funding. He spoke to Nick Ferrari on LBC this morning.
This is about giving more support to GPs so they can see more patients promptly in a way that the patient chooses. And there's a lot of things in this package, but if I can just highlight 2 or 3 things very quickly. The GPs rightly came and said, look, if you want us to see more people, we need more funding for capacity. So this is £250 million in terms of a winter access fund. They wanted to see changes in the infection protection control guidance so they can get more people in their surgeries, but obviously in a safe way. And that's what the UK Health Security Agency is exactly what they've done. And they said, look, can you take some of the workload offers and put it into other parts of primary care? And that will really help us. And that's why we're expanding what's called the community pharmacy scheme. And taken together, this means that more patients can be seen promptly, including far more face-to-face.
Doctors have pushed back, however, with the Royal College of GPs insisting they can provide good quality care remotely. Just to add to the controversy, Sajid Javid decided not to see GPs face-to-face this morning himself. He was due to appear this morning at the Royal College of General Practitioners' annual conference but pulled out. Dr Michael Mulholland, who chaired the conference, read out the reason for Sajid Javid not showing up face-to-face. He told GPs,
"Unfortunately, this morning we do have one change to the programme. The Secretary of State for Health for England is unable to join us today, either in person or by video link. This is because, and I just need to get this right, he had to clear his diary to ensure he can fight for the NHS in the spending review, or be anywhere else you may have seen or heard him this morning."
So what's the beef? How important are face-to-face appointments? Are they really not happening enough? Well, Dr Bushra Khawaja is a GP partner in the London Borough of Hillingdon and a member of LMC, which is a representative group for GPs, and more importantly is a regular listener to this programme. And she joins us now. Bushra, very good evening.
Good evening, Ian.
This seems to be a bit of a row over not an awful lot in many ways, because surely, I mean, just tell us how you operate in terms of face-to-face meetings and operating remotely, because for some appointments you do not need to be face-to-face, do you?
I mean, that's completely correct, Ian. I mean, remote consultations work really well for some people, and for others they don't. But I think that's a little bit of a red herring, really, because can you imagine driving to work this morning, hearing the headlines generated from Sajid Javid's statement, completely demoralising GPs to be pushed to see more face-to-face patients, or to have their funding removed and to be named and shamed? I mean, honestly, does he really think that GPs don't want to see patients? That's not the truth at all. He's the health secretary. He knows as well as anyone else that the numbers of GPs have been falling, despite a government promise to increase the numbers of GPs. Demands on general practice have been increasing, so you see the mismatch there. I mean, general practice has always been stretched, and post-pandemic, the demand has increased even more. So Ian, you're asking me, how do we operate? The demands are phenomenal. I heard, I think it was the Royal College of GPs representative talking about how 30 years ago, on a bad day, he may have dealt with 25 to 30 patients. Now, on a bad day, which is every day, we deal with 50 to 60 patients. Now, Ian, I'm sure you can imagine I wouldn't be able to see 60 patients face to face. So some of them will be via telephone, some of them will be an e-consult, they fill out a form, some of them will be by video. But this is completely, it's a sound bite from Sajid Javid, from the government, about seeing patients face to face. He thinks this will be popular with the voters. There's no real substance to it. There's no real support for GPs. Not really valuing us, not even turning up this morning to talk to GPs.
I mean, maybe I'm old-fashioned on this, but I would have thought that GPs were intelligent enough to work out which patients they definitely need to see face-to-face or not, and that's not really the job of the Health Secretary to determine that.
Completely, Ian. So I run a telephone triage most mornings, and I don't have appointment slots, but I will say to some patients, I need to see you, so you need to come down, and I don't have a slot to put you in, so you won't be able to sign in on the screen, but you tell reception that Dr. Khawaja wants to see you. And, I've got an endless stream of patients at my door on the phone. I mean, I'm working harder than I've ever worked before. Sajid Javid is completely out of touch. I mean, a few days ago, another headline did make us laugh. The government to allow pharmacists to prescribe to increase more time for GPs. I mean, pharmacists have been prescribing for years. That really isn't the answer. We need more GPs. He's really out of touch. He should have gone to talk to the GPs this morning and really understand the problems on the ground.
Just finally, what's happened to these extra GPs that Jeremy Hunt was recruiting several years ago?
So what's happening is, of course, recruiting GPs, training GPs will take time, and it's actually becoming harder and harder because who wants to join a profession which isn't valued, is villainized in the media, and isn't supported? So it's actually very
villainized in the media, really? I can't remember a single occasion when I've ever villainized GPs, and I can't think of any of my colleagues that have either.
Ian, you're quite balanced. I don't want to name any presenters, but we are villainized because it's an easy target. It gets lots of people calling in saying how terrible GPs are. So, as a GP, I can tell you that there's a lot of negative information, negative vibes in the media about us. And it's not going to help the workforce that is already burning out. You've got GPs retiring early. You've got GPs turning to other careers. It's unsustainable. And, we love our work. We don't want to leave. We want to be GPs.
And long may you remain so. Bushra, thank you very much indeed for joining us. That's Dr. Bushra Khawaja, a GP in the London Borough of Hillingdon. Now, listening to that was Justin Madders, Shadow Health Minister and Labour MP for Ellesmere Port and Neston. And he joins us now. Justin, very good evening.
Evening, Ian.
Let's pick up on that last point about the villainisation of GPs, as Bushra put it. I have to say I don't recognise that either in the written press or in the broadcast media. Okay, given what Sajid Javid has said today, I suppose you can say that some politicians may be accused of that. But do you think that GPs get a bad rap in the media?
I think it, like everything, there are certain times when they do get a bit of stick, often unfairly. And I was actually with some GPs today. I did a visit to Halifax to talk to them about some of the issues that they are facing, and they were pretty demoralised, to be honest, because what they feel is this announcement has again raised expectations that everyone will be able to have a physical appointment with a GP. And there simply aren't enough GPs to go around, and that's the nub of this. That government promises to increase the workforce have not been met, and this is why we've got this difficulty we have now.
I don't expect you to say, OK, well, if we were in government, we would be recruiting an extra X number of doctors. We're not kind of in that stage of the political cycle yet. But Jeremy Hunt, when he was Health Secretary, did say he was recruiting 5,000 extra. Now, is that essentially just a drop in the ocean, that there needs to be many, many more than that?
Well, he said there would be 5,000 extra by last year. And, of course, we're actually about 2,000 less on a full-time basis. What's missing from all this, and I think Jeremy Hunt is probably now a late converter to this, is the need for a long-term, fully funded, open and transparent workforce plan, because that is what is missing from all this. Because obviously we know it takes many years for someone to train to be a GP, or indeed in most of the medical professions. And what happens is that we have these short-term initiatives and policies that don't actually address the long-term strategic needs of our nation. And until we have a recognition from government that that's what they need to do, we're going to have this cycle over and over again.
In terms of the winter plan that Sajid Javid announced today, do you support any of that, or do you think that there should be more provided to help the NHS through the winter?
Well, I certainly think some of the discussion about making better use of pharmacists is to be welcome. But I have to say, starting from the position that this £250 million is coming from a fund that was already there, so it does beg the question: is something else dropping off the other side of it? But the idea that there are hundreds or thousands of GPs sat at home waiting for a call to come in and do some work is just a fantasy. So I'm not quite sure how well that £250 million is going to actually deal with this issue of face-to-face appointments. I'm sure some of it will make GPs and patients' life easier, but what we're lacking in this is the raw workforce numbers, and I don't think anything that we've heard today will address that.
Okay, Justin, thank you. That's Justin Madders, the Shadow Health Minister. Philip Allott has resigned as North Yorkshire Police Fire and Crime Commissioner after coming under fire for comments he made on the Sarah Everard murder. LBC's Charlotte Elmore reports.
Philip Allott received a huge backlash for his comments about women needing to be more streetwise after the murder of Sarah Everard. She had been tricked into thinking she was being arrested by serving officer Wayne Cousins, who then raped and killed her. This is what the Commissioner told BBC Radio York almost 2 weeks ago following the sentencing.
A police officer can't just arrest you. There has to be a reason. So COVID, for example, I would classify as a summary offence. It's not an indictable, i.e. sent to prison or potentially go to a Crown Court. So women, first of all, just need to be streetwise about when they can be arrested and when they can't be arrested.
More than 1,000 complaints were recorded following this interview, and despite a swift apology for his remarks, today Philip Allott faced a police and crime panel, with members taking turns to encourage him to resign and unanimously backed a no-confidence motion.
I have no confidence in you. I don't think your apology is worth the words that you've said or the paper that you've written it on.
I'm shocked that despite the public outcry, despite petition, and despite the crass comments, you're still sitting in your position.
And as a man of honour, which I know you to be, you must go, and you must go now.
There was no resignation from Mr. Allott during that meeting. Instead, he took the time to apologise again and insist he could regain people's trust.
It does not represent my views, or more importantly, the actions I have taken or supported since my election in May to address male violence against women and girls.
This afternoon, we've received an open letter from Philip Allott saying he will resign from his post as Police and Crime Commissioner. He said that over the past 2 weeks he's tried to rebuild public confidence in him, and again said his remarks do not reflect his views. He goes on to say that following this morning's meeting, it's clear that restoring confidence will be exceptionally difficult, if at all. Speaking in North Yorkshire today, Sir Keir Starmer says the resignation should have come sooner.
He's quite right to go, and he should have gone 2 weeks ago. What I find astonishing is that the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary have been silent on this. For a government that claims to be serious against violence against women and girls, to have stayed silent through this period, I think is very, very difficult for them to justify. It was obvious when he made those comments that he had to go. He should have gone sooner, but I'm glad he's gone now.
The panel will now arrange the appointment of an acting commissioner, and a by-election will take place.
Charlotte Elmore reporting.
Ian Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
7:20. Shortages continue to cause problems, with the government introducing temporary visas so foreign butchers can be drafted in to ease a crisis in pig farms. The shortage of abattoir workers means there's a huge backlog of animals. Farmers say they can't afford to keep them all, and thousands may have to be culled. Earlier this month, Boris Johnson was asked about how to deal with issues like this.
What we can't do is, in all these sectors, simply go back to the tired, failed old model, reach for the lever called uncontrolled immigration, get people in at low wages.
So there will be problems, and that's part of the plan.
Let me ask about low wages.
Let me ask about something else.
And yes,
so we're talking about
there will be a period of adjustment, but that is, I think, what we need to see.
So, what is the solution? Should we have predicted this? Marley Morris is Associate Director for Migration, Trade and Communities at the IPPR and joins us now. Marley, very good evening. How could the shortage of abattoir workers have been predicted, do you think?
Good evening, Ian. Well, I mean, it was predicted by many people, not least ourselves. Back in 2017, we warned that there would be a shortage of food workers as a result of post-Brexit labour shortages, and obviously the combination of COVID, people leaving the UK after the pandemic struck, and then it seems in combination with some of the post-Brexit immigration changes, it seems that has resulted in these shortages. So it was widely predicted before these new rules were introduced, and it's now come about.
So if you predicted it in 2017, clearly the abattoir sector didn't take any notice because they've had 4 years to take measures to combat that, haven't they?
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair point. I mean, obviously the reason we predicted it was that there is a very large share of EU migrants in these particular sectors. It's some of the reliance on the EU citizens more so than pretty much any other sector in the UK economy. So, absolutely, there should have been more preparation both from business and from government on this. I think there is a real challenge here because I suppose many of these businesses had little options available to them in terms of thinking about how to redesign their recruitment models, because in many cases they were relying so heavily on EU citizens, and because the new immigration system doesn't really allow any route for you to recruit people into these roles, particularly some of the roles that are deemed low skilled.
Presumably, the government would say, well, you've had 5 years to prepare for this. You're not paying enough money. You're not recruiting from the UK labour market. You need to pay people more. That was what they wanted from Brexit.
Yeah, and some sectors, I think they will pay people more, and that's a good thing. We absolutely support that. But the problem is that I think in some sectors it's going to be hard for employers to do that, and what will happen instead is that they'll resort to other methods. So, for instance, in some sectors, I think particularly actually in food processing, the risk is that these sectors end up shrinking and they end up relying on imports more, and actually that's of detriment to the UK. So I think that's the risk, and that's why I think government does need to act.
OK, Marley, thank you very much. That's Marley Morris from the IPPR. Senior Conservative MP David Davis has accused YouTube of censoring him after the platform removed his speech criticising the use of domestic vaccine passports in Britain. The video of the former Cabinet Minister speaking on the fringes of the Tory party's annual conference last week was uploaded by the civil liberties campaign group Big Brother Watch. David Davis joins us now. When I read about this, I couldn't quite believe it, that they were censoring you just because you were speaking against vaccine passports, which I would have thought was a fairly mainstream view.
Well, what it certainly is a central argument going on right now. I mean, the government keeps talking about them, and other politicians, and there were about half a dozen MPs there, I think, at the time, are arguing with it. So this is a central argument in which you've got to hear both sides. And YouTube took it upon themselves to say, well, this clashes with the official consensus, and therefore taking it down. That was pretty much the words they used.
Presumably, though, they've got some algorithm where if you're anti-vaccine passports, they probably assume that you're anti-vax, which of course you're not.
No, absolutely. Indeed, I went to a great deal of trouble at the beginning of the argument to say, look, I'm vaccinated, my family's vaccinated, I recommend you to get vaccinated, and supported the science on that. And indeed, I mean, the arguments I put were based on scientific work that has been published in the last 6 months, some of it by Public Health England. So it is quite extraordinary. But they've put it back up now, YouTube. I think they realised they've sort of rather burnt their own fingers. And when doing so, they apologised and they explained that it was initiated by an algorithm, but a human being made the decision. Although I have to say, I suspect it is entirely possible the human being wasn't even in Britain. Somebody somewhere else in the world making this judgment, and that makes it even worse. We've got somebody other than the British citizen actually deciding what British citizens are allowed to see and hear. And the other wonderful irony in this, of course, is it was Big Brother Watch that they shut down. You couldn't make this up. I mean, if you tried to invent a way of demonstrating that you can't trust the big platforms to police our free speech, this is it. This is the perfect parable, which, of course, is also perfectly timed.
The even worse thing, though, is that if your name hadn't been David Davis, if it had been Joe Bloggs, I doubt very much whether they would have put the video back up.
Oh, yeah. If it was Ian Dale, it would have been there for years.
Touche. No, but I mean, that's really worrying, though, isn't it? Because it just means that ordinary people who do now have a voice through social media platforms can effectively be censored with no recourse.
Yes, and indeed, actually, this is the latest example of really a long track of the platforms shutting down argument about this. I mean, for example, early on in the COVID-19 crisis, it was viewed as borderline lunatic to suggest that the disease might have come out of an escape from a laboratory. Right? Now, of course, there's a significant, respectable body of opinion saying it may well have done that. But early on, if you said that online, you'd probably get shut down. There are other legitimate arguments about whether lockdown works or not. All these bits of controversy where the government's one side. Apparently, the government scientists are on one side. That's not a time when you shut things down. But this is just the latest example of a load of these. Indeed, I actually think they shut down an account of a Nobel laureate, a Nobel scientist, talking about some of these issues. So I just think they can't be trusted. And of course, you make the point. If it wasn't a well-known politician and a well-known campaigning group, they may never have backed off. But that's why this, as I say, the timing is relevant, because literally today was the first new committee hearing for the online safety bill, which actually gives these people not just the right, but the duty to police the internet for things that I think the government's phrasing is are legal but harmful. And the question then is, whose judgment? Plainly, you can't trust this judgment.
OK, David, thank you. That's David Davis, the Conservative MP for Halton Price and Howden. Time for our business roundup now with Andy Sylvester, editor of City AM. Andy, good evening to you. Now, bad news for City bankers.
Yeah, evening, Ian. They aren't going to be they're going to be looking at their bank balances next year with as big a smile as they might have hoped, because the UK is set to keep the EU's cap on bankers' bonuses even after, of course, we've left the bloc. The Treasury is instead focused on a range of other measures to shake up financial services regulations post-Brexit, but pay will not be amongst them, source close to the Treasury telling us today that it isn't a priority right now. There are some voices in the city who say that it absolutely should be priority. The UK, it's quite clear from when you look at the numbers now, is not competing with Frankfurt or Paris for financial services firms. It is, in fact, competing with New York, it's competing with Singapore. And the way to keep our bankers here, so the argument goes, rather than there, is to allow them to be paid on a level equivalent with those other places. We shall, of course, wait and see. It may be slightly overblown. You can understand why a Tory party keen on keeping the red wall happy would not exactly want to allow for the days of excess in the city to return too quickly. But nonetheless, if you can't pay people as well here as you will elsewhere, they may leave. There is an issue here.
Now, Domino's are hiring 8,000 drivers. That's an awful lot of pizzas.
It is indeed. 8,000 drivers. My concern on all of these stories, we talked about Morrison's hiring 3,000 workers for Christmas the other day, is that no one can hire anybody at the moment. There are labour shortages right across the economy. And these vacancies and the lack of people to fill them, that puts wages up. We're yet to find out from Domino's whether they will be paying, above their usual rate for these roles. But that strikes me as the only way they're going to find people when, places that, frankly, have more hospitable hours and perhaps, more, I'm going to put this politely, more pleasant jobs, are not taking those jobs either way. So there's a real issue with staff shortages right across the economy. Domino's hiring 8,000 people. The question, of course, for them, like everyone else, is who is going to do those jobs.
Now, another energy firm fails.
Yeah, this one, Dali Gas, very small, 9,000 customers, so probably not affecting too many listeners, but that makes it the 13th to go since the start of August. Still no sign from the Treasury that they're particularly minded to step in to rescue any of these firms. More interestingly, though, there are rumours abounding in the city that another firm, CNG Energy, which is a wholesale gas supplier, essentially a sort of middleman between suppliers to our homes and gas producers, could also be in trouble. That will have a big knock-on effect, could send a few more over the edge. So I'm afraid the news remains fairly grim in the energy sector, although it's worth saying, as ever, consumers are not going to have the lights go out.
Andy, thank you. That's Andy Sylvester, editor of City AM.
LBC Business Update.
With Direct Line Business Insurance. Receive the support of a dedicated claims handler should you need it.
Coming up, Prince William questions whether sending billionaires into space is really a number one priority.
This is LBC with Ian Dale. Call 0345 6060 973.
It's 7:35, time for a sports roundup with Rob Harris, global sports writer for the Associated Press. Rob, good evening. Now, more on those arrests at Wembley.
Yeah, there were 90 arrests we've discovered at those England games at Euro 2020. 7 games played by England during the tournament, 6 of them coming at Wembley. And we're waiting the punishment still, actually, from UEFA after the disorder at the final against Italy that, of course, England lost. It's due to take place next week, the hearing. What this has shown the police is that actually now is not the time for drinking to be allowed in sight of the pitch. There had been some calls to allow booze back inside the stadium bowls, but Mark Roberts, the chief constable who takes a lead on football policing matters, says the trend is showing that actually drinking should not yet be allowed at the seats because of the link between violence that has been taking place, particularly that disorderly conduct at the Euros.
Now, sticking with the world of football, amazingly, Steve Bruce is still Newcastle's manager. He'd been tipped for the sack, hadn't he, after the takeover?
Yeah, widely so. We're now a week into the Saudi ownership of Newcastle United, and the reports were that over the last weekend that Steve Bruce was set to be denied taking charge of his 1,000th game in management on Sunday against Tottenham. But he's been holding meetings through the week at Newcastle. He's been taking training, and now he's due to give his pre-match press conference on Friday, the indication that Bruce remains in charge. It's not taking place till the afternoon tomorrow, so of course there is still some time for the ownership to decide to make a change. No one directly in the frame at the moment. In other football news, Manchester City have received a blow. Ferran Torres, the forward, is going to be out for some weeks. He's broken a bone in his right foot while away with Spain. And some news of Torres' Spain teammate, Pedri Gonzalez, who's been handed a new contract with Barcelona until 2026. What makes this so eye-catching is the 18-year-old now has a release clause of €1 billion. Not many clubs could afford that, apart from Newcastle.
Yeah,
perhaps.
quite, I was going to say. Now, Roger Hunt's funeral was held today. He, of course, was a Liverpool hero, 1966 World Cup hero too.
Yeah, and Liverpool's record league goal scorer. The service was held today at Liverpool Cathedral, lasting an hour. The 83-year-old died last month, and amongst those paying tribute at the service was the former Liverpool player Kevin Keegan. Talking about not only was Roger Hunt a World Cup winner in 66, but also scoring the first ever goal on Match of the Day, 5 hat-tricks in a season, and top scorer for 8 years at Liverpool. He's questioned why there isn't a statue yet of Sir Roger Hunt, as the Kop call him at Anfield. Of course, he was never knighted. That's certainly how the Liverpool fans call him. And there was the singing of You'll Never Walk Alone, the Liverpool anthem, before a private ceremony took place at Anfield Crematorium.
Rob, thank you. That's Rob Harris, global sports writer for the Associated Press. Now, Norway's security service says a bow and arrow attack which killed 5 people is being treated as terrorism. 4 women and a man were killed in Kongsberg last night. A 37-year-old man is being detained by police. Well, Tone Strom Gundersen is news editor at Aftenposten, Norway's largest newspaper, and she joins us now. Tone, a very good evening. Obviously terrible events last night. Just take us through the aftermath and the police inquiry.
Good evening. Yes, it's really terrible. And what has happened after this 37-year-old man, he killed, as you were saying, 5 people in Kongsberg last night, and also 3 people are injured and in hospital. And the police were able to take him into custody, and he has been staying there overnight. He has explained himself and confessed to what has happened, and he will be put forward for jail tomorrow morning.
What do we know about him? I think I read he's Danish.
He's Danish, but he's been living in Norway since being a child. But he's a Danish citizen. Yeah, but he's been living in Kongsberg.
And do we have any idea what his motive was?
No. We don't know yet. I mean, he has been interviewed by the police, but we don't know the motive yet. I think we will probably know more in tomorrow morning, because when he's going to jail, there will be a small trial where he will probably explain himself. But the thing we do know is that he made a video in 2017 where he was speaking. And there was also a friend of his who were not turning him in, but were sending a message to the intelligence service about his behavior. But apart from that, we don't know that much about him, and especially not about his motives for what happened last night. No.
And Kongsberg is quite a small town, isn't it? The population there must be traumatized today.
Yeah, because it's a small town, it's narrow streets, and the people live, quite close to each other. And it's about 50 miles southwest of Oslo. And of course, yes, people were hearing what was happening in the streets. They could hear it from their houses. And it turned out now, information we received tonight, it turned out that he was also actually entering people's houses and probably killing 2 people staying inside their house.
Should we read anything into the fact that 4 women were killed and just 1 man?
The police is stating that the victims were casually picked out. It doesn't seem like there is any connection to him or between the victims at all. It seems more like a coincidence.
Okay, thank you very much for joining us, Tone. That's Tone Strom Gundersen from Aftenposten in Norway. Well, Captain Kirk actor William Shatner became the oldest person ever to go into space yesterday. But not everyone is impressed. Here's the view of His Royal Highness Prince William.
We need some of the world's greatest brains and minds fixed on trying to repair this planet, not trying to find the next place to go and live.
The Duke of Cambridge is working on the first Earthshot Prize, which will reward those working to tackle climate change. So is this more worthy than the billionaires launching themselves skywards? Tim Fernholz is senior reporter at Quartz and author of Rocket Billionaires, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos and the New Space Race. Tim, very good evening. What do you make of Prince William's comments?
Well, good evening there. I would say they're pretty ignorant. Not that I'm particularly surprised, but yeah, they missed the point on a number of levels. I think, we can all agree if someone came down and said you can choose between 2 binaries, space exploration or saving the planet, the right choice would be saving the planet, but that's not actually the choice that exists. It's interesting that this gentleman who lives in a palace and enjoys going on safari is concerned about luxury tourism. In the world that we live in, a lot of things are happening. And I'm curious, does he think that, we should not be spending on movies? Should we not be auctioning off art? How about mega yachts? Are these the kind of things that we should cast aside in favor of a direct focus on climate change? But hypocrisy aside, I think the real thing that he doesn't realize is how important space technology is to fighting climate change. While this space tourism project is basically a sideline, a lost leader for Jeff Bezos' space company Blue Origin, the learnings and the technology they develop in creating this New Shepard rocket is going towards other kinds of technology and driving an entire ecosystem of new privately backed space companies. These companies, like Planet, are gathering data about the climate that is vital to combating climate change. And really, we wouldn't be able to even understand the problem without space technology. So for me, I think it's kind of funny, especially given that the UK government has recently rolled out a national space policy that notes that 360 billion pounds of economic activity are generated by the space sector in the UK every year for 45,000 jobs. The UK government just bought a share of OneWeb, a major internet constellation, internet satellite constellation, I should say. So it seems like he's not entirely clear on what's happening here. I would note he's concerned about the climate impact of the rocket themselves. The rocket that carried Bill Shatner into space yesterday is fueled by a mixture of hydrogen and oxygen. The exhaust that it produces is water vapor and doesn't have much of a climate impact at all. There are real concerns about the environment in space and about other rockets that produce carbon emissions, but it's much smaller than, say, the global airline industry. I think it's important that people understand that we can walk and chew gum at the same time. The prince has made these comments as he's rolling out his Earthshot Prize, which, if my math is correct, is a $50 million series of prizes over the next 10 years, which, I think is great. But does he know that Jeff Bezos is giving away $10 billion to climate science over the next 10 years? I think neither of these donations should obscure other things that this business leader or this aristocrat do that might be problematic for inequality or the pace of climate change. But I think in this case, someone told the prince that he would get a good media bump if he went after space tourism, and he didn't spend a lot of time investigating what is actually happening in space technology.
Well, Tim, the definition of a perfect guest is when you speak and I don't have to ask you any other questions because you answer all the questions I would have asked anyway. So thank you very much indeed for joining us tonight. That's Tim Fernholz. He's senior reporter at Quartz. His book is called Rocket Billionaires, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos and the New Space Race. Coming up, Police Scotland launches a campaign to tackle violence against women, calling on men to question their own behaviour. It's
Ian Dale on LBC.
10 to 8, Police Scotland have launched a new video campaign calling on men to question their own behaviour to tackle violence against women. The Don't Be That Guy campaign says its aim is to reduce rape, serious sexual assault and harassment by addressing men about male sexual entitlement. Let's take a listen to a clip from the campaign.
Ever called a girl dull? Or whistled at her walking down the street?
Ever stared at a woman on a bus or said to your mate, "I'd do that"?
You ever give a girl a compliment? Like nice?
And wondered why you didn't get a thank you?
You ever guilt tripped her?
Or pressured her?
Or pushed her into it?
And then left feeling like a lad?
See, most men don't look in the mirror and see a problem.
But it's staring us right in the face.
Well, we want to hear from you about this after 8. If you're a man, how have you adjusted your behaviour? Is this the right approach? But first, Verity Levitt is co-founder and director of the Gemini Project, a non-profit organisation against sexual violence, and she joins us now. Verity, good evening. I thought this video was actually quite powerful. What was your view?
Yeah, it's really powerful. It's a really powerful video, and I think it's so, long overdue. We've been waiting such a long time for this messaging to come out, where, the onus for violence against women and girls is placed on men who perpetrate the behaviour. So, yeah, it's incredibly powerful, and it's definitely long overdue.
Have you got any evidence that men, not all men are going to do this, but some men are actually questioning their own behaviour, their own actions in the light of the Me Too movement, in the light of the sort of recent publicity about violence against women and girls?
I'm not sure they are, actually. I think some people who I have spoken to in my personal life and have said that they feel a bit anxious about certain things. And I think that's good, making those comments, those sort of sexist jokes that are a bit misogynistic in the workplace and not doing that anymore is really good. There's definitely a lot of anxiety around kind of false allegations like, oh, I can't do this anymore because someone might say this, which just isn't true. So I think there still needs to be some education around that. And around what sexual violence is, what constitutes sexual harassment or sexual assault, and where those lines are. So I think this video goes really, does work towards that and saying, don't be that guy, and kind of illustrating a few things that lead to that or are that.
Is the problem here that some of these actions that men undertake, which may seem very minor to some people, actually, in the long term, can risk leading to more serious sorts of behaviour that really would impinge on a woman's safety?
I think it all just adds to a culture. So many of these things say it's okay. It's like the normalisation of this behaviour. So what we see is, casual catcalling or these kind of sexist jokes being told amongst mates. But that all adds to this rape culture. And also a culture of impunity that men do have, as we've seen from the prosecution rates, which are 1.6% at the moment, which is very, very low, that they can get away with these things and they know that they can. And activists have been trying for so long to obviously put an end to violence against women and girls to no avail. And so it's really good to finally see the messaging and the focus on men and their behaviour, the ones who actually perpetrate these crimes.
And in terms of what you would like to see happening, I mean, this campaign, I think, is a good one, but it's from one police force among many. What would you like to see done further than this?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. This is from Police Scotland, who just 3 days ago it was reported that 245 counts of sexual misconduct were made against 166 of their police officers in the last 4 years. And of all those cases and complaints, there was 0 dismissals. So I think that's really interesting that we're seeing this messaging, but they're not necessarily doing it internally with their own officers. They're not really practicing what they preach. And I think similarly, obviously, we need to see this messaging in England and Wales. What we've had instead is within London, the Metropolitan Police crested a dick saying, just wave down a bus if you're being targeted by a police officer or feel unsafe. So it's quite interesting to see the discrepancy and difference in the messaging between forces, and I think there does need to be some consistency. I think this is a really good start, and hopefully other forces will kind of see how good the reception for this campaign has been, and maybe do something very similar. But I do think that Police Scotland, whilst they're being applauded for this campaign, which is great, it also has to be said that they don't take sexual violence seriously. Many of their own officers, as I said just a minute ago, have perpetrated domestic and sexual abuse and are rarely, if ever, held to account, as illustrated by those 0 dismissals. So I do think, as much as this kind of preaching and this campaign is doing, which is great, they do need to do a lot of self-reflection at the same time.
OK, Verity, thank you. That's Verity Levitt from the Gemini Project. As I say, we'll be talking about this over the next hour on LBC. I want to get your experiences. I particularly want to hear from men who have deliberately changed their behaviour. Maybe sort of in the past, you have been somebody who might wolf whistle a woman walking down the street or make some sort of little comment that you think is quite funny. But then when you think about it and you think about the effect that it could have on a woman, maybe you stop doing that now. That's the aim of this video, to persuade you to examine your own behaviour. 0345 6060 973. The lines for that are open right now. Now, the Night Tube in London will reopen from the end of next month, but only on the Central and Victoria line. So if you live in West London, North West London, South East London, overnight tube services were paused 19 months ago at the beginning of the pandemic. Thousands signed a petition last week calling for the night tube to return in the wake of Sarah Everard's murder. Sadiq Khan said it was an important move, particularly for the safety of women and girls. But all these months on, surely it can be brought back on more than 2 lines. Well, Keith Prince is the transport spokesman for the Conservatives on the Greater London Authority, and he joins us now. Keith, very good evening. Why only 2 lines?
Well, that's a very good question. I think because we had Mayor's question time this morning, and he worked out that if he didn't do at least something, he was going to get clobbered by virtually every party in the room. But no, we also agree. We think, of course, it should be back to the 5 lines as soon as possible.
I mean, if the tube is safe to use, which the Mayor says it absolutely is, I mean, I can't see the argument for not bringing it back. It's not as the London night economy, I'm told, is now roughly back to where it was pre-pandemic, and there are hundreds of thousands of people who want to get home at night. And if you, as I say, if you live in parts of London, you're not going to be able to.
Well, I absolutely agree with you, and our line is that he should open all 5. We suspect it might be that he's having problems with the unions. He had a bit of a row with them earlier in the year because he downgraded all the night tube drivers, and obviously he's got to negotiate with them to get them back being night tube drivers. So I suspect it's something to do with the unions, to be perfectly honest. But yeah, I mean, I totally agree that there's still all the care workers, key workers, essential workers, and of course the economy desperately needs that confidence.
And he's under fire for cancelling the fireworks again on New Year's Eve, and yet he's allowing a big event related to a religious festival at the end of this month in Trafalgar Square, where there will be tens of thousands of people congregating in probably a relatively unsafe environment, COVID-wise.
Well, you know, he's a mayor of contradiction, isn't he? You know, he just says what he thinks people want to hear on the day that he says it. But, you know, again...
So unlike his predecessor, isn't he, Keith?
I can't possibly comment.
Well, you could.
That.
You could give me a newsline, couldn't you?
Yeah,
you could agree with me.
Can I quickly say something, though, actually, relating to your very interesting earlier subject about men being aware of what their impact on women. The other night, I was actually out jogging quite late, actually, around about 9 o'clock, so it was dark. And I was jogging, and I was catching up 2 women. And they, first of all, they sort of looked over their shoulder. Then they started walking a bit faster, and I thought, actually, I need to not catch them up. I need to just turn around and run in the other direction because clearly I was causing them some distress. So I think there is an onus on us to be aware of those sort of situations.
Well, I think that's very wise advice. Keith, thank you very much indeed. That's Keith Prince, Transport spokesperson for the Conservatives on the GLA. Now, coming up in a moment, we're going to be talking about this video that we mentioned just a few minutes ago. It's called Don't Be That Guy, and it's a campaign by Police Scotland where several men describe actions often passed off as insignificant, but the women might find threatening or intimidating. The video bears the caption, "Most guys don't look in the mirror and see a problem, but it's staring us in the face. Sexual violence begins long before you think it does." If you're male, have you changed your behaviour towards women in the light of many recent events? 0345 6060 973.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC. This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Ian Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's 3 minutes past 8 on LBC. I want to talk about male behaviour in the next hour, and this is not going to be an hour where I want people to have a go at men particularly, but I do want to know if you as a man, we'll come on to women in a minute, if you as a man have changed your behaviour recently because you've come to understand that some of the things that you've been saying, which you consider to be pretty innocuous, or some of the things that you've been doing, which again you may have thought were pretty innocuous, you've come to understand that for some women they're absolutely not, and they're not a laughing matter. Now, I'm asking this because there's a new police campaign that calls on men to look first to themselves when considering how to tackle violence against women. The Don't Be That Guy campaign by Police Scotland includes a video in which several men describe actions often passed off as insignificant, but the women might find threatening or intimidating. Now, the video bears the caption, "Most guys don't look in the mirror and see a problem, but it's staring us in the face." sexual violence begins long before you think it does. Now, in the video, male actors address the viewer directly and express how gestures that can be dismissed by some as insignificant can form part of a larger problem, from unwanted compliments to calling a woman doll. Let's just hear some of the ad.
Ever called a girl doll?
Or whistled at her walking down the street?
Ever stared at a woman on a bus or said to your mate, "I'd do that"?
You ever give a girl a compliment? Like nice?
And wondered why you didn't get a thank you? Ever slid into a girl's DMs and went ahead and just showed her it?
You ever bought a lassie dinner and felt that meant she owed you something?
You ever got 3 shots in a row hoping you'd get a shot of her? Then what? Bundled her wasted into a taxi and took her back to yours?
You ever guilt-tripped her? Or pressured her?
Or pushed her into it?
And then left feeling like a lad?
See, most men don't look in the mirror and see a problem.
But it's staring us right in the face. Sexual violence starts long before you think it does. Don't be that guy.
I suspect the majority of men listening to this programme have done one of those things, if not more, and thought nothing of it. Because it's just the way society is. It's the way that, I mean, being a lad, if you're a teenager or in your 20s, that's what lads do or did. I wonder whether things are changing because of some of the incidents that we've spoken about a lot on this station over the past, well, not just 12 months, but a few years. You think back to when the Me Too movement was at its zenith 3 or 4 years ago. You think back to the Sarah Everard murder and all sorts of other incidents. And I think that this video is really onto something, that I think there are a lot of men have actually started to examine their own behaviour. Things that 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, they wouldn't have thought twice about saying or doing. And yet now we do. And it's not because we've all become woke. I mean, let's dismiss that for a start. I think it's because we've begun to understand a little bit better what women in general find offensive. Now, it's all very well me as a man sitting here talking about this, but this is where I want to hear the female side of the argument. Have you noticed a change in some of your male friends, for example, or just random strangers who might, 5 years ago, have wolf whistled you or done something which you might have thought, well, you wouldn't have said anything, but you just felt uncomfortable? Is there any change? 0345 6060 973. Malcolm Graham, Deputy Chief Constable of Police Scotland, spoke to Sheila Fogarty on LBC earlier today about this campaign.
Well, I think it's part of a sustained course of campaigns, messaging, communications, trying to generate conversations that Police Scotland's been doing. We did a campaign a couple of years ago that sustained called Get Consent, and it was aimed at men. And essentially it's relatively straightforward, that we're asking men to stop committing sexual offences, as opposed to what I think we've heard is from women getting a little bit fed up of having the responsibility put on them to change their behaviour. So the origins of this campaign come from that, and we've worked with a huge number of groups, both who work with men but also who work with women who are victims of sexual violence and domestic abuse, and we've built from that a campaign that we think tackles some of the issues that create the underlying culture and the permissive environment for some of these things to thrive, and we want to stop that. And primarily we want to put that responsibility onto men.
Yes.
To say, actually, whether you're committing these acts at whatever level, including serious sexual crime and rape, you have a duty and a responsibility as a man to challenge your peers, your family, your friends, your colleagues, to change the society that we live in.
And yourself, as in the whole business of putting a mirror up to yourself as well about this.
Absolutely, to reflect, and through those conversations, hopefully, to learn. And I think we've picked that up already, that there's been some genuine learning and light bulb moments for men who have said, well, actually, that was me. I did used to do that, but now I've heard what women have said, and I've listened, and I understand what effect it's had, and I'm changing my behaviour, and that's what we want to see.
Have you witnessed that light bulb moment?
I've witnessed that in a number of cases, and I think even since we launched this campaign, I've seen that reflected in some of the social media and other responses to it, where people have said that the power of the videos caused them to pause and reflect, which is what's been designed to do.
And what about those lower level, I know it's not helpful language really, but the lower level stuff, the stuff I've just described yesterday on my route home, none of those were incidents I would call the police about. But, and none of this, not all of this can be tackled just by the police. Clearly it's a wider question than just policing. But it's part of that video, isn't it? Those little moments in life where a girl or a woman is left thinking, either being uncomfortable or thinking, oh, do one, But what do we do about those as a society?
I think that's hugely challenging. I mean, I'm extremely sorry to hear of your experiences yesterday, but I think what I've heard in listening to women, and of course we've, had a particular focus on the fear and concerns that women have, whether in public spaces or elsewhere, and during the course of this year and more recently, as a result of the focus on some ghastly cases, I think we just need to open up the conversations. We need to make sure as men that we're listening to women and the experiences that women have that are not low level, to use your language, but I think are every day. And it's terrible that is the case. And actually the people that can be responsible for changing that are men. And we do that by raising the profile of the issues, forcing people to confront the impact of those behaviours, and ensuring that where action can be taken, it is taken. And the police have a role to play in that. But you're right, this is about generating a conversation across society, but making sure that happens in the places that it needs to reach, which is men, boys, groups of men, and that's where this campaign's been taken to. We're pushing this campaign into places that it might not otherwise reach, because that's the intended audience.
And what about Scotland's wider strategy of violence against women and girls?
Yeah, I think, in terms of Police Scotland, we've got a really long history of raising the profile, but also taking really strong action to tackle sexual violence, child abuse and domestic abuse. And we've done that through building up the skills and the confidence of our own people in specialist units, and through every officer who has to deal with the victims who are traumatised by these horrific crimes that we know don't get reported to the police as often as they can. And in terms of a wider approach, I think everybody's got a part to play in demonstrating that this won't be tolerated by society. We don't want to live in a country where violence against women and girls is endemic, and where that everyday behaviour that you yourself experienced yesterday and described appears to have such an impact on every woman and girl's life as they're growing up and living in Scotland. We want to challenge that. We want these conversations to be had.
Yeah, it's the air we breathe, is the truth of it. The kind of incidents I described yesterday, that's the air we breathe, I'm afraid. This campaign, you've already said it, it's targeting male behaviour and challenging boys and men to address their own behaviour. There are police forces, across the country, across the world probably, who react to incidents by asking women to stay inside, voluntary curfews, be streetwise. Hand on heart, have you ever said anything like that? Have you ever sanctioned any messages like that?
I think in the past some of our campaigns have focused round about personal safety. And, in a broader sense, of course, there is a place for personal safety messages, but I think in relation to this particular issue, and specifically violence against women and girls, gender-based violence, we need to be really clear that the responsibility to effect a change in that space does not rest with women. It rests with men changing their behaviour. And to say it like that, it's relatively straightforward, but I think that's what all of our messaging and all of our actions should flow from, and that's certainly what we plan to continue doing now.
That was Malcolm Graham, Deputy Chief Constable of Police Scotland, speaking to Sheila Fogarty. Jen Selby is from the Women's Equality Party. She's a campaigner and journalist who's written extensively about rape, the justice system and women's rights. Jen, very good evening. What's your reaction to this campaign by Police Scotland?
Hi, Ian. I just want to say thank you so much for dedicating a whole hour to this issue. It shouldn't be such a landmark thing to do, but it really is. And I know that there are other women out there and survivors like myself who have found themselves in the rough end of the justice system because of misogyny. Are incredibly grateful for this this opportunity to speak to men and to discuss this issue. In terms of the campaign, I think it's absolutely brilliant. Because finally, we've been calling for this for years. The onus is on men in this campaign to educate themselves and hold themselves accountable for their own misogynistic behaviour, no matter how small they might think it is. That sort of sexist language, catcalling, which is whistling at people in the street, touching women without permission, anything like that. Really, it's dehumanising, and it is a gateway to violence against women in the same way that other hateful speech and language is. So racism, for example, which we know still exists and is still a huge problem, and we kind of want them to be on a par and treated similarly. So far, the government and police response in England and Wales to the public outcry following the murders of Sarah Everard and Sabina Nessa have largely focused on what women can do to stop men attacking them, which has avoided the root of the problem, which is violent men and a toxic culture of misogyny that allows assaults on women and girls to take place. And we know this won't work because women aren't actually the problem, and we're already doing everything that we can to prevent attacks from happening in the first place. So far since then, the England and Wales response has been hand us rape alarms, tell us to stay home after dark, tell us to be more streetwise and to stick to brightly lit public spaces. And we know that both Sarah and Sabina did all of those things. And look where it got them. I really do think England and Wales can learn a lot from this response from Police Scotland. But I'm aware that campaign alone isn't going to fix the problem. And we need this to be part of a wider and deeper educational programme that is run in community centres, in schools. And ideally, we need misogyny to be recognised as a hate crime so that sexist language and behaviour that incites violence is taken more seriously. We also need the police in this, and that's one thing that I didn't hear the Commissioner say there, is that we need the police and the criminal justice system to examine the misogyny that is baked into the core of what they do too. That there isn't anyone that is immune from this. It's such a huge part of our culture. It's probable that everyone has done something, and women included. We don't realise sometimes that we contribute to our own oppression in this way because we don't, some of the language we use against each other is sexist.
I'll give you an example in that I will bet my bottom dollar that I will get a middle-aged lady ringing up over the next hour saying, I don't mind being wolf whistled out. I take it as a compliment.
Yeah. But do you know what I mean? And that comes from this idea that the existence of women is, and our entire value revolves around pleasing men and doing things for men. Of course it doesn't. We're all human beings. Our value is as valuable as any other person, and that is, outside of any of that. It's certainly not to do things for men.
Let's talk about things that are at the sort of, shall we say, lower end of the scale here, because
sure.
If we have a conversation about drugs, I will invariably say, well, show me a heroin addict that didn't start on cannabis. And I think that argument works here, that show me a rapist that didn't make some sort of what people might consider some sort of harmless comment towards women sort of before they ever got into that kind of thing. And it's actually, I think that the most powerful people in this argument are men's friends, who start to call them out on things. And it just then makes you think twice about your behaviour, doesn't it? It's behaviour which you will have thought was perfectly acceptable, maybe for years. And then if your mate calls you out on it, you may not immediately say it to them, but you might start thinking, as this video says, you look yourself in the mirror and start to examine your own behaviour. And that's really all that can be achieved at the beginning, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, and you're right in terms of it's a journey for everyone when you start to sort of unglue the way that we've been conditioned over time to behave in a certain way and to say certain things. And it is so important, that peer pressure and that social example setting. And that intervention is so important. We actually know from what you're saying, for example, Wayne Couzens, we know that he was doing so-called lower level stuff before he went on to attack Sarah. We know that he was flashing people in public, for example. There is no chance that, that these people would have been sort of immune or anomalies or separate from growing up in the way that everyone else has in an environment in which sexist comments, in which that lower level stuff isn't just parcel of the fabric of society.
Let me just read this text out to you because, I'm getting quite a few of these at the moment. I don't know whether this is from a man or a woman, but I suspect it's from a man. Just remember that there are just as many horrible women as horrible men. LBC should be discussing horrible behaviour by both sexes, not demonising men. Well, it is true that there are women who objectify men and catcall in the same way that men do against women. But you're in a better place to answer this one than I am.
I don't know. I think you'd be very good at answering it, Ian.
No, I'm delegating it to you.
I think you know the answer, but I will answer it. It's very clear to me when you say that. It's a deflection, isn't it? It's like every argument that you have with anyone. It's batting away the issue here. I mean, the reason why women's campaigners and women's rights campaigners are so keen to call this male violence against women and girls is because we want the issue to focus specifically on that. Of course, there are some violent women, but overwhelmingly there are violent men. And I know too that men can be the victims of violence, and there are, that's extreme. The numbers of that are extremely high, but again, that is down to male violence. It's not down to the numbers the other way around are.
Essentially, let's be blunt about it. The answer to that text is that it's men who rape women. It's not women who rape men. There have been the odd occasion over the years, but not very many.
You also actually legally can't do that because legally rape is penetration, so that it doesn't exist the other way around even. But yeah, I mean, it's ignoring the scale of the problem. It's ignoring the fact that 1.6 million women are in domestic abusive situations. It's ignoring the fact that 1 in 5 women, count 5 of your female friends, 1 of them would have been raped. Yeah. If we go under the age of 19, that's 1 in 4. Count 4 young girls that you know,
so
or
it's
teenagers,
getting worse.
1 of them will be raped.
It's getting worse.
Well, the justice system, in terms of holding people to account for it, the justice system, the rates, the conviction rates are getting worse, yes. And it's hard to tell whether it's getting worse, whether people are reporting more. But what we do know is it's a staggering amount of women. It's a huge, huge number. And those numbers just aren't the same the other way around.
Jen, it's great to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. That's Jen Selby from the Women's Equality Party. We'll come to your calls in a moment. 0345 6060 973. It's 20.
Ian Dale on LBC.
It's 8:25 on LBC. Let's go to your calls. Let's have a word with Gary in Maidstone. Hi, Gary.
Hello, Ian. I can't believe I got through to you, actually.
Well, there you are.
I was just phoning up because I'm not very articulate on the phone or speaking or anything like that. So I just wanted to sort of put a note through. With everything, I have changed my ways a lot, actually, with the U2 movement and all that. I mean, I used to look at women and think, being a male, I used to think they want what I want, but they don't. And, driving and looking at women and they turn around and you're staring at them, that's completely wrong. And I felt really bad about this, especially as I got to, we've got 3 stepdaughters, and I thought if someone done that to them, I'd hate them for doing that. And then with blokes at work, we sort of see people and go, cool, look at her and all this. And now I've just changed that completely. I just don't think that's right to look at a woman like that.
Was there a sort of penny drop moment for you, or you've just gradually reached this conclusion?
It's gradually reached it, actually. The way, the thing about the Sarah Everard thing, and, well, before that, long time before that, actually, I started thinking, because I've got, say, stepdaughters, and I was thinking, well, I don't want people to look at them like I would look at someone else driving down the road. And, working in a male environment, I used to, we all used to go, we should drive around town and look at women, look at that. And that's so wrong. I can see that now.
Is this also something that you think men are discussing with each other now about what is acceptable and what isn't?
I don't think so.
Because that, I think, is what the aim of this video is, to try and encourage men to discuss these things with each other, or even to pick each other up on things that they witness people doing.
I think so. Yeah, definitely, because that is brilliant, that kind of thing.
I mean, in a way, that's why I wanted to do this hour tonight, because I don't expect to be bombarded by thousands of calls from men saying, "Oh, yep, I've changed my ways." I mean, you have done, but it's really to try and encourage a bit of discussion between male friendship groups, because that, I think, is really the way to change attitudes.
Definitely, yeah, because we don't see anything wrong with that. We didn't see anything wrong with that. And now we're thinking, that that's not the way to act.
I suppose it's trying to encourage men to think like a woman, which I know sounds weird, but if you try and put yourself in a woman's position, which I know is not always easy to do, but if you think, well, if somebody did that or said that to me and I was a woman, would I think that was acceptable? And too often the answer is no, isn't it?
Definitely, yeah. So I think we think it's like a compliment, really, that we're sort of paying some interest in them, and they're happy with that. But obviously, they're not. I mean, obviously, some women would be, but not generally. I don't think so.
Okay, Gary, thank you very much. Let's hear from some female callers on this as well. Do you find that you yourself are more conscious of this sort of behaviour by men now, more than you would have been before? 0345 6060 973. And have you actually ever confronted a man who has done something or said something that you just felt was inappropriate? Maybe it didn't make you feel unsafe, but you thought, well, it could have made somebody else feel unsafe, and you've confronted a man about this. What happened then? 0345 6060 973. Dave says, men are always wrong and they get blamed for everything. Some men are violent and some men are bad, but millions are decent, hard-working, honest people who get worn down by being constantly belittled and criticised by society. David in Chester says, Ian, the use of the term lower level, even by Jen Selby, is wrong. This is not a sliding scale. It's all wrong. If lower level wolf whistling, etc. continues, we will never get equality and safety for women. Well, I think you're trying to pick a fight there where it doesn't exist. The only reason that term lower level is used is because you're not telling me that wolf whistling is on the same level as a man groping a woman's bottom on the underground, for example. That they are on a different level. And I don't know how else to describe that. But I mean, I hear what you say. I know the point you're trying to make, but I think you're nitpicking, if I'm honest.
Ian Dale, text 84850. This is LBC.
8:34, a text here from Anthony. If I see a woman walking alone in front of me, I always cross the road so that she doesn't feel uncomfortable or threatened. My male friends do this too. Jason in Plymouth, you should try driving a taxi with a few drunk females. Females need to stop attacking guys. George says, but is it being woke, Ian? Being woke isn't a bad thing. It just means that you are awake to other people's issues. Cindy says, it's a powerful advert. That she's talking about the video that we played you earlier. I really hope guys start talking about it together when one-on-one or in groups. Then some good will come of it. And I think, Cindy, you've hit the nail on the head there. That, to me, is probably the biggest thing that can come out of this video, that men, boys start talking to each other about what is acceptable and what isn't, and then talking to girls and women about it as well, because no point just having a conversation among men, is it? Elizabeth is in Liverpool. Hi, Elizabeth.
Oh, hello, Ian.
Hi.
Nice to speak to you.
And you.
All it was last weekend I was with my 16-year-old nephew, and we were speaking about the Sarah Everard case and misogyny in general. because we have those kind of conversations. And he was really concerned because he says he doesn't really know. You know, he's never had lessons in school. He feels like, and there just isn't enough talking about it. And he has a cousin who is more or less the same age as him, a female. A female cousin, and he is really very concerned about her and how people act around her and what he should do. So he is speaking about it, and you know, we had a long conversation and we went into all sorts of things, and so I know the last caller was saying, oh, you know, men don't talk about it. Well, men mightn't be, but boys are.
Well, the one thing which I'm horrified by what you've just said is that this hasn't been discussed in his school.
No, that's. I would have thought that's PCHE, is it called now?
Exactly.
That, and especially because he went to a mixed school, so it's not like he was, you know, ever. And I have to say he's on the spectrum, but he's not. Well, it's a different, you know.
I mean,
so it's difficult for him to pick up cues anyway. Yeah. But if somebody like him who finds it difficult to pick up cues is questioning what he should be doing at 16, then surely that's hopeful.
Well,
is what I want to say.
I
mean, I had a man attack me, nearly run me over, like ran his car at me today. So, and I've had troubles in the past, but I was thinking he will never do that because he's had conversations.
Yeah, I do think that the generation of boys growing up now, generally, and yet all we can do is generalise here because there will always be many exceptions to a particular rule. But I think there are different attitudes now among teenagers, and I can't explain why I think that. And you look at some of the crime figures, and maybe that isn't borne out. But I think certainly in some schools that do actually put this on the PHSE curriculum, I think it does make boys understand that some of the behaviour that they may have got from their fathers or older brothers isn't acceptable anymore. Elizabeth, thank you. Let's go to Michelle in Brent. Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Ian. How are you?
Hello. Very well, thank you. What would you like to say?
What I'd like to say, Ian, is I think it's a lot to do with education. I think young boys and young girls, we need to learn about this in the schools. The head teachers have to come down with zero tolerance. For years and years now, we've been hearing the stories what's going on at school. Boys sending naked pictures, naked videos around the school, going from school to school, to place to place. The schools need to zero tolerance. The person expelled who's found doing this. The police need to be involved. A caution. They need to get a criminal record. There's no fear in these young men. The way they talk to women, the way they behave. And then it stems from childhood, teenage, adolescence, then it goes into late teens, early 20s, then they get onto dating sites. I've been on dating sites on and off now for a while, and the way the men speak to you on the dating site, they think they can get away with it. So it continues on, Ian. I had a guy last week, hi sexy. I said, excuse me, my name is Michelle. That was it, delete. He then deleted me, blocked me. So no one's being held account for their behaviour, Ian. The tech people, the people that do the dating sites, there's no screen check for you to go on it. So if there's a politician listening to this tonight, please, I would like a lot of young girls who are on dating sites and young men as well. So it's not all men, we know that, but there's a lot of young girls and girls coming out of marriages, ladies coming out of divorces that are on the dating sites, and they're being speaking to not very nice. The tech giants aren't doing anything about this. They're allowing this behaviour to continue.
Well, there is a site called Bumble, where, as I understand it...
I'm on that, Ian, yeah.
But I mean, you have total control over that, don't you? Because it's it's the women who approach the men first, not the other way round.
Yeah, that's true. But then the messages come then, the sexual messages come and innuendos after that. And then, can I have a picture? Excuse me, you can see my picture of my profile on the site. No, that's not that kind of picture. You know, it's this constant, Ian. And the tech people aren't being held account to this. You know, and there's young girls, things are happening to young girls, they're going missing, things are happening. You know, that poor lady met that guy on Tinder in New Zealand. The other girl met that guy that took her out on the boat, and then he, you know, just left the poor lady, and then absconded to another country. And there's no checks to go. You know, if there's a politician listening, they have to do this. Put a check on these people because they're just anonymous and they're getting away with this sexual content.
It's so difficult, isn't it? Because if it's not something that one country can regulate, is it? It has to be done internationally, and I'm not sure that even then. You could do it. I mean, dating sites, that's a whole other phone in, isn't it? But
of course, I know, Ian. but Ian, also, you know, I work with children and I work in a gym, and I've been police checked to work there. I wouldn't mind being police checked to be on a dating site, so that all my information's over, so that if anything happened, it comes back to I'm being police checked. And women don't mind doing this, but you know, the men need to do this as well to stop a lot of this crime and sexual violence against women. It's going to continue. I was in the park going for a walk, and this guy said something very, very sexual to me. I was horrified. I rang 999. Police turned up and they went and approached the guy. I told them what he'd said, and I thought if that was a young girl, I was in my 20s then, but if that was a young 14, 15-year-old, that would mark that poor child. You know, my nieces tell me they're 17 and 18, and men say these to them in the car. It's not acceptable anymore, Ian. There needs to be zero tolerance.
Well, it's a really good point, because you don't know what effect. I mean, with some people, it will have no effect whatsoever. They'll shrug it off and just carry on with their normal lives. For others, you're absolutely right. It can be absolutely searing. Thank you very much, Michelle. Let's go to Sam in Whitechapel. Hello, Sam.
Hi, Ian. I'm sorry, but I really disagree with everything, because I used to work in the security industry, and a lot of these handsome, young, strong, muscular people, they get grabbed by drunken women all the time, and they're not supposed to complain, because a real man doesn't complain. Some of them are married and don't appreciate that sort of behavior. And I can tell you, it goes on very much more than what happens to women, but the women get away with it. Men don't get away with it. And as far as men just
do you not see
women,
the difference, though? Do you not see that there is a difference there? I'm not justifying what any woman does in that situation whatsoever. But the fact is that sexual violence, and I mean, whether you class that as sexual violence, I don't know. It's obviously groping, which you shouldn't do. But it goes back to what I was saying earlier on, in that it is men who rape women. It is not women who rape men. And that, I think, has to be the sort of deciding factor in this discussion. What you said is absolutely right. There are women that do that. It's incredibly distasteful.
A lot of women, and one of your guests said when men see women, they say, oh, I'd like to get hold of that. But do you know what women say among each other when they see good-looking men? They say much more than that. And even in hen parties, you can't check them. They grab the people, you know. So it's not the way things are described.
Whataboutery doesn't really work here, does it, Sam? And
sorry?
Whataboutery doesn't really work in this discussion. We are talking about male on female violence and sexual aggression.
We never get a chance to say it's the same.
But it's not the same. That's my point. And if you can't see that, you're part of the problem.
Where am I? I never do that to anyone. But
I'm not saying that you do that to somebody, but surely every man in the country at some point has got to think, well, have I ever said or done anything that a woman could regard as inappropriate? And if I think I have, then I need to change my ways.
Yeah, but they've never said what women haven't said to them. But they do it silently, not vociferously.
Okay. All right, well, maybe we'll do a phone-in on that one day. This is a text from somebody who doesn't give their name. Ian, I punched and kicked an elderly man on live TV, Dale, pontificating on LBC about violence. First of all, I've never punched anyone in my life. I've never kicked anyone in my life, apart from maybe on a football pitch occasionally. I pulled somebody away from a camera. I didn't punch him. I didn't kick him. So just want to make that very, very clear for those of you who know what this is on about.
Leading Britain's conversation. Ian Dale. Tweet at LBC.
8:49. Now, you may think this is a slightly tricky subject to talk about, and it is in many ways, because it's one of those subjects where, again, a word out of place, and it doesn't end very well, really. Well, after 9, we're going to talk about a very emotional subject. It's National Baby Loss Awareness Week this week, and we're going to talk about whether there's enough support for people who have lost a baby either before birth or after birth, if there's enough support available, and what experience do people go through? Because there'll be some people, I mean, look, it's going to affect you for the rest of your life. I completely get that. But how difficult is it to talk about? It's one of those subjects that I think it's one of the last few taboos that we've got in society, in that if you know somebody who's gone through that experience, you don't know what to say to them. So I want to hear from people who maybe have had that awful traumatic experience, to maybe give us a little bit of advice on how you can help someone through that. So that's our phone in from 9. The number, as ever, 0345 6060 973. Right, let's go back to your calls. We're talking about this video titled Don't Be That Guy. If you want to watch it, it's on YouTube. Just type in Don't Be That Guy. It's all about trying to persuade men that we all need to look ourselves in the mirror and think, well, are we doing things, are we saying things that women could regard as inappropriate? Jess is in Hounslow. Hi, Jess.
Hi, Ian.
Hello.
Thanks for taking the call.
Not at all.
So just a little bit about my story. I was in the workplace and experienced a scenario where there was basically the person I was serving, a customer, was taking some images of me. I noticed it because the camera was kind of pointing towards me, and I'd noticed some kind of bizarre behaviour. Anyway, the whole thing ended up in court, got thrown out over a technicality, and basically, because it wasn't classed as a public place, there was no offence committed. The point I'd want to make is it's all well and good having a video to kind of ask men to take a look at themselves. However, in these situations, it kind of comes from one of your previous callers. They mentioned that it's about accountability, and at the end of the day, if nobody's actually held accountable or understands the consequences of their actions via the legal system, then ultimately, you know, we can't just expect men to change their behaviour overnight, when really the laws need to be looked upon as well in order to make people feel like that is something on their side.
I think you're right. It's too much to expect a whole group in society to change their ways overnight. All you can do is hope that over time attitudes do change and things improve, because I don't think there'll ever be a time, whether it's in 10 years' time, 50 years' time, 100 years' time, when men won't make inappropriate remarks or sort of grope women in underground trains.
And to be honest, and this is probably not going to resonate well with a lot of women, but I work in the motor trade, and it sounds awful. It's almost like you expect it, and it's kind of like it's a male-dominated environment, and almost you become accustomed to it, and it's just a way of life. And sometimes you can just get on with it and accept it. And you know, there's got to be a line drawn. I completely agree. But at the same time, it's like there is that banter element that people have to take into consideration. We can't live life just, you know, completely serious all the time. But then you've got the complete other the other aspect where Wayne Couzens murdered someone, and there is just a very difficult. You either, I suppose, people are looking at it in Scotland as you either draw a line completely and it just doesn't exist at all, or you're opening the floodgates.
Well, let me ask you a
things.
question. You say you work in the motor trade. Is it sort of in like car showrooms or garages or what?
That's where I previously did, but it's a different role now.
I mean, if we were talking about, say, like Kevin Webster type Coronation Street garages, 30 years ago, every single one of those would have had a calendar up with half-naked women on them.
So that's the thing. I walk through workshops quite regularly, and the guys have got, pin-ups on their toolboxes and things.
So
and
that still happens.
It does. It's frowned upon, but it does. Yeah, it happens, and it's like, close the toolbox, lad. Someone from the manufacturer's coming, or it could be whoever's coming to visit. Let's make it look right. But essentially, it still happens, and where does the line get drawn at the same time?
Jess, thank you very much. This is from Brian in Gloucester. He says, Ian, you are my favourite LBC presenter. You can tell there's a but coming, can't you? He says, tonight you've become holier than thou. Only tonight? I don't think that saying that women deserve to be treated with respect at all times is being holier than thou. I would have thought that that's something that we should all aspire to in our society, isn't it? I mean, I don't think that's being controversial. Susie in Hither Green says, Ian, I feel so strongly about this. Last weekend, my 33-year-old partner came home from a stag do in Lisbon, 13 men in their early 30s. I overheard him telling a friend that he was amazed they didn't get thrown out of the bar they were in, as the groom was drunkenly stood on a table with his trousers down for about 5 minutes, exposing himself, which they all thought was funny. I was furious and so disappointed. To get your genitalia out in a public space is something that will make some people, and especially women, uncomfortable for a whole host of reasons. Yes, some are our society's prudishness, and it might be better if we were all more liberated about nudity. But the fact is, we don't inhabit that utopia. We inhabit a world where men's assumptions that they can make strangers look at their genitals without that stranger's consent. These acts of sexual microaggression are everywhere, and until men start calling their friends out about it, we will never be treated equally. Well, I'm supposed to be going on a stag do next year to Los Angeles for my friend Dan. That's a warning, isn't it? John is in Hornchurch. Hello, John.
How you doing, Ian?
I'm all right, thank you. What would you like to say?
Just as I said to your researcher, that I feel that people will usually change their behaviour if they see things around them change. So obviously education is good, and keep obviously still preaching to the masses that we should be treating our women with respect. But if they're not seeing that in society, how are they supposed to change? And this is from all levels of society, whether it's at home, whether it's out in the streets. We have to see it in society for our minds to change. Like as I said, education is good. People go to school, but they don't take in things. But then if you're seeing things in your home, around your friends, on the TV, and it's promoting women being valued, then that's when you're going to start to see change. But until that happens, you're not going. It's going to be a hard, or not even hard, a slow change in our mentality to actually truly think that. Because people automatically think that, all men respect women. No, that's not the case. Some people don't know what respect is. Some people think that their actions are okay. And some people think that, oh no, he should know better, but he may not know better. And it's all of a thing of assumptions. Men should treat women. Oh, he should have been taught, but that's not the case. So until we actively change how we view women in society, at home, on the radio, on the TV, then that's how we can actually refresh our minds and renew our minds and actually understand that women are to be valued and are the same as us.
John, thank you very much indeed. Liz in Cardiff says, sad to say, but reaching menopause means I'm getting less random comments from men, and I feel relieved. Sadly, the comments are now starting for my teenage daughter. the cycle continues. And that's the point, isn't it? That is the point, that the cycle continues unless we, and I say we as men, do something about that. And try and talk to each other about it and try and lead by example. That's all that we can do, I suppose. We're going to move on. Coming up in the next hour, I want to talk about another very emotional subject, but in a very different way. It's National Baby Loss Awareness Week this week. And I thought that was a good opportunity to talk about this whole issue because I think we have done it before on the show, but not for some time. And I wonder whether you've gone through this awful trauma of losing a baby, either before birth or after birth, and you felt that you were on your own. And this is a subject both for men and women, because I think men sometimes get forgotten in this, because the woman obviously carries the baby, but it can be equally traumatic for men as well. I want to know, is the support out there? And how do you talk to somebody about this issue? 0345 6060 973.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Ian Dale.
Coming up to 3 minutes past 9 on LBC. It's Ian Dale here with you until 10. John in Fiskerton in Nottinghamshire says, Ian, remind me to turn LBC off at 9 o'clock. Well, it's 2 minutes past 9. What a ridiculous subject for public discussion. A highly personal situation that will be handled as it will be handled, according to the people involved. What is there to discuss? Well, you're about to find out, because we are going to talk about the loss of a baby. It's National Baby Loss Awareness Week. Now, I think it is absolutely a subject which needs discussing. You can't just sort of shove this subject down the back of a sofa and hope it goes away, because there are so many families in this country that have gone through this, but it's not something that is talked about very much. It used to be mental health that wasn't talked about very much. Well, that is now talked about a lot, and a very good thing too. And I think it's very difficult to understand. Excuse me. It's very difficult to understand the traumas that someone goes through as a parent who loses a baby, whether it's through a miscarriage, whether it's during the birth, whether it's as a young child. I can't put myself in the situation of somebody who's been through that. And I think sometimes people who do go through that feel as if they're the only ones who've ever gone through it, or the only ones that are going through it at that time. And what I always think about these sorts of situations, it reminds people that they're not alone, that there are many, many other people who've gone through the same thing. So there are a couple of questions I want to try to get some answers to tonight. If you've been through this awful trauma, what kind of support was there for you? Now, there are various charities that offer support, but if you don't know who they are, if you don't know how to get to them, how did you find the support in your local community? How did you find the support among your friends and family? How did you and your partner support each other? Because it is, I think, the case that this can also lead to the breakup of relationships, because one party of the couple finds it very difficult to talk about and bottles it all up, and then therefore the other part of the couple feels that they can't discuss it with them at all. Now you can imagine the traumas that can lead to as well. So I suppose I'm going to ask you, and this is a difficult ask, I do know that if you've been in this situation and that you've lost a baby, I want to know how you got through it. Even saying got through it is the wrong expression. How do you, it's something that is with you for the rest of your life. How do you cope with that? Is it something that you think about every day? Is it something that you feel that you can't talk about to even close friends and family? 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. Well, Jenny Ward is Chief Executive at the Lullaby Trust, who aim to prevent unexpected deaths in infancy and promote infant health, and have been involved with Baby Loss Awareness Week. Well, Jenny, very good evening to you.
And to you.
Where do we start with this? Because it is one of those subjects that just isn't talked about very much, is it?
No, it isn't. I think in the last few years it has actually become more of a public
an issue that people are more willing to talk about publicly. And I have to say, I think there are some key thanks really to do for that. And some of them actually come from Parliament. They are from MPs who, during Baby Loss Awareness Week, have stood up and shared sometimes very personal stories that they've not shared outside of a very close-knit group in their lives. And really, things like that do trigger people to come and find support from charities like ours. And you were exactly right in saying this is about raising the awareness and making sure that people know there's support out there.
So even now I'm getting text, one here from Mike Lee, who says, "You are so off-piste, you have no right to bring this issue up for ratings." I'm not talking about it for ratings, I'm talking about it because it needs to be talked about. And someone's saying, "Have you got kids? Have you been through this?" No, I haven't. And that's why I want to know more about it, because I think you've got to really try to understand the traumas that people go through. I mean, Jenny, you tell me about the work of the Lullaby Trust and the kind of people that you try and help.
Yeah, well, the Lullaby Trust is 50 this year. We've been around for 50 years, and our focus is on what used to be known as cot death and is now more commonly known as SIDS. So babies that were apparently perfectly healthy who die suddenly and unexpectedly. And even now in 2021, for hundreds of babies, we don't know the cause. I know that's extremely frightening, and I can understand that there'll be people listening who are frightened to hear that. But throughout the past 50 years, and before that, there were many babies that were dying in those circumstances. And we think that the only way we've been able to learn and to save babies' lives is through each one of those babies and their families and the brave things that they've done in sharing their experiences and what happened to them. One of the things that we do for families who come to us now is to offer them peer-to-peer support. Now, we couldn't do that if other bereaved parents weren't brave and generous enough to give their time and their support, because they know how isolating it was for them. And that's something really important that we do and that families find really important to do, to be able to have. So this is really what this year has been focusing on. It's about bringing everybody together into a community that nobody wants to have joined, which is about having something happen to you that you absolutely never planned to happen, and what that's meant for the rest of your life, and how you've managed to kind of get cope with it in some way.
I remember all those years ago when my friend Anne Diamond lost a child through cot death syndrome, and the awful things that were said to her because she went public with it, because she knew that there were lots of other women in the same position. And I mean, she was traduced by so many people, but I think she performed a massive public service by saying what she did. But there are all sorts of different circumstances here. You have cot death, sudden infant death syndrome. You have children who die in childbirth. You have, women who have abortions. Well, I mean, they have to have a role in this as well, because there will be many women who maybe come to regret it even very shortly after they've had the abortion. There'll be many women who've had miscarriages. So there's all sorts of different people in different circumstances. And then I go back to what I said at the beginning of the hour. There's also the man to consider in this too. And I remember last time we talked about this subject, I had so many men phoning in saying, yeah, what about us? Because we go through it too.
Absolutely. And one of the things that we've been doing this week is to focus on all those who are affected. And you can look at any of the social media posts. There are